Mind over matter. It's all about using willpower to overcome even the most challenging physical obstacles. Meditating monks to professional athletes apply the mental practice. But can it be used every day by any one of us to rise above any taxing situation? This week on Full Frame, conversations with people who believe the answer is yes, if we really tap into the power of the mind. I'm Mei Lee in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. You can't talk about short track speed skating without mentioning Apolo Ohno. His impressive career totaled 8 Olympic medals, making him the most decorated American Winter Olympian of all time. Apolo's competitive spirit soars off the ice as well and onto the dance floor. In 2007, he competed in and won Dancing with the Stars, a popular TV dance competition show involving celebrities here in the U.S. Now, more recently, in 2014, Apolo completed the prestigious Ironman World Championship race in Kona, Hawaii. He's actively involved with various organizations, as well as his own Apolo Ohno. And Apolo joins me now here in the studio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Well, I'm a huge fan, and I think you got a lot of fans in the world, especially, obviously, because of your speed skating. How did you get started in speed skating? Because it's not like the most popular sport for a kid to do, right?
It's not. I saw short track speed skating on television in 1992 and then again in 1994, and I literally just tried it. And that's how it began. I asked my dad, I said, I wanted some pair of skates. I want to try this out. Let me go to the local ice rink. You know, I had done some inline skating. You know, as a kid, you go to the local roller rink, so I knew how to skate. I had never skated on ice before. So when I was 14, I moved away from home, from Seattle to upstate New York, Lake Placid, New York, which is the home of the 1980 Olympic hockey movement, you know, the Miracle on Ice.
That's right.
And so I trained there for about 6.5 months or so, and then I made my first team. Literally after 6.5 months of training, I made my first team. I didn't just make it, I actually was #1 in the U.S.
That's pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, it was very strange. I was like an anomaly in the sport. No one had seen me before. I was still wearing like my long swimming coat jacket that kids wear before they go into the water. That's all I had. I didn't have a proper skin suit. I didn't know what was really going on.
And you were #1.
I was #1 in the U.S. at the age of 14. Yeah, it was
so you obviously found your calling. I guess you should thank your dad for that, because he was really pushing you in different ways to try to find something that you wanted to do. And your dad, I mean, he's your #1 fan, but you're his he is your #1 fan, and vice versa, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Is that he raised you alone.
He did. So I grew up in a single-parent household. My father and my mother divorced before I could obviously remember, when I was very young. My father decided to take me full custody, raise me my entire life, and it was definitely not easy. You know, I think anyone who grows up, I mean, when you have kids in general, I'm sure it's not easy, but especially in a single-parent household, you know, there's double the pressure. And my father, normally you see it traditionally is the mother bearing and keeping the child, and this time it was my dad. So it was difficult, especially with a kid who had so much ridiculous amounts of energy, difficult time focusing in school, didn't really know or had any passions in terms of pure academics. Although I did well in school, I didn't know really how to parlay this energy that I had into something that was going to be productive, which I think is the struggle for probably 90% of kids these days, right? I got this energy, where do I place it? And that's where, to me, sport was really, looking back at my career now, it was beyond just going to the Olympics. It was really an outlet in which it was my art form, it was my expression, it's how I learned so much more about my own character. I developed character. I learned lessons, life lessons, accelerated my learning process.
That's what I'm wondering. I mean, what was it for you that allowed you to take it to the next level as Olympian champion?
You know, I would say it was pure obsession. I was just, #1, I love the sport. I really love the sport. I love athletics. And I really took a lot of pride in improving what I saw in myself as weaknesses and bringing those weaknesses up to a level where that now they were on par with my strengths.
Right.
And so I was just very mentally driven. A lot of my process throughout my career, teammates and coaches and support staff and my father and friends. But I also I spent a lot of time alone, and a lot of that time was shaped, and I'm sure many of you can, it was kind of relate to this. I was just kind of shaping and molding my own personal style and technique and character and visualizing and
visualizing, that's something that you always hear athletes talk about, right? Because they need to visualize the race or whatever event that they're going to participate in. And so I think that seems to be a very powerful tool that athletes seem to use.
And I think visualization and mental training and imagery, before it was allocated really to the elite of the elite sports athletes, the guys who go to the NBA championships, they go to the Super Bowl, the people who are clutch in the Olympic Games, and they have that one moment. And now it's transferred into, we've noticed businessmen, we've noticed other celebrities, people who have every single day lives, who are seemingly normal civilians, are utilizing this so-called special technique and skill. I'm a huge believer in the mindset of an individual. No matter what the challenges that you have, no matter what the obstacles you face, the human mind and willpower, which is very difficult to measure by science, has and can produce extraordinary results. I love that.
Yeah, that's the thing. They say we only use 20% of our brain capacity, right? So the fact that if you can tap into more of that power of the mind, the mind over matter, all of those sayings that we hear over and over, it's true, isn't it? You really can tap into something so much more powerful by thinking, feeling it, and doing it.
People who study the brain, all these neuroscientists and these these people who really understand how the brain works, the science, and then this newfound kind of spiritual. We live here in SoCal, so we see kind of the whole realm of people's belief systems and how they treat their body, their meditative practices, etc. I meditated every single day when I was training as an athlete.
Did you?
Every single day in the sauna for at least 15 to 30 minutes. And some days it was just strictly focusing on my breathing. Some days it was focusing on the visualization of how I would want the next day to go, or my perfect race, or how I envisioned. We used to do something called imagery healing, where I would sit in the sauna and I would just visualize my cells healing themselves, taking the toxic lactic acid out, and just kind of pumping and And so look, how do you quantify that into something that's a result? I don't know, but it felt that it worked, and to me, that's all that matters.
It certainly can't hurt, right?
Yeah, it's all that matters.
What was when you were competing?
Wow, that's difficult. I would have to say, I competed in 3 Olympic Games, 2002, 2006, and 2010. My final Olympic race in 2010 was in Vancouver, BC, where I learned how to speed skate. Growing up in Seattle, my father would drive me back and forth to Vancouver to go watch the Canadians skate, and I would kind of mimic them and copy them and see how they raced and their techniques. And so that's where I kind of learned how to speed skate, and now my final Olympic Games, I kind of ended my career. It was a very picture-perfect scenario. So I think that was the culmination of all of my years and years of training, not only from a physical perspective, but what I had gone through mentally, and my own personal, my self-growth as a young man was really coming to a head, at least at that chapter in my life. So that was a huge proponent towards, I think, just giving me that confidence that this is probably the best moment of my life in sports. But you know what? As an athlete, and I never want to take away from my Olympic career, because I cherish that with all my heart, no matter what happens in the future, it's still just one chapter, right? And I understand. When I was competing as an athlete, I used to think, like, I don't want to do anything else. And I used to get people who used to ask me, what are you going to do after you're competing? And I would answer something, but in the back of my head, I was like, what do you mean when I'm done competing? I'm going to compete. Like, I'm happy. If I died speed skating, I'm happy. Like, I was completely content with what I was doing.
You were in that moment.
I was in that moment. But now, having been retired for 6 years and, traveling around the world, focused on different projects, having different interests now, I miss training and skating every single day of my life.
Do you?
Every single day.
Really?
I miss it, absolutely. And the transition from professional or Olympic athlete into whatever, businessman, post-Olympic or post-athlete career is perhaps the most difficult and challenging aspect for any athlete in the name on the planet. And there's only been a handful who's been really, really successful.
So you obviously retired, but you didn't stop with the competition because you decided, crazy person that you are, to do the Ironman triathlon, which is truly the sort of, honestly, the hardest athletic thing that you can do.
I would say it's up there.
It's got to be up there.
So
Why? Why did you do that?
Well, I ran the New York City Marathon in 2012, and then this opportunity came up to do the Ironman in Kona. Not just any of them, but the one in Kona, Hawaii.
That's the big one. Everybody wants to do the Kona.
It's the World Championship, right? So it's the ultimate. Only a select number of individuals get a chance. You have to earn your way to get there, number one. And then there's a few slots that are available to those who have not pre-qualified. I did not pre-qualify. And so there was this thought in my head saying, well, I don't want to take this for granted. Number one, there's a lot of people here who would die to have this opportunity. This is what they want to do for their life.
Sure.
And so I took it really seriously, and I trained really as hard as I could for about 6.5 months, had an excellent, incredibly motivating and gifted teacher named Paula Fraser.
She's a multiple Ironman winner, isn't she?
She won like 14 Ironman.
Yeah,
she's amazing.
Right, right.
So she coached me, and I spent some time down in Carlsbad, California, training with her, and the process was incredible. You know, I first did my half Ironman. It was so hard, and I remember I was running with this woman. Her name was Charlotte. She must have been, I don't know, she must have been like 60 years old or something. And I'm running alongside of her in the final like 5 miles of this half Ironman, thinking like, I'm an Olympic athlete, and this lady is pulling away from me.
That's incredible.
What is going on? So I'm
That's
trying to
kind of humbling, isn't it?
With her, so she slows down. Right? Like, I don't want anybody to get this on tape. This is
that's
embarrassing.
Great.
And so after that half Ironman, I came to a consideration in my mind, you know, to realization. I said, okay, I have to take this seriously. And so I went back and I really trained as hard as I possibly could, and showed up in Kona and had the most exhilarating experience in my life. Literally.
Really?
Yeah, it's very spiritual. For me, it was very, very spiritual.
And I read somewhere that you don't really like to talk about your Olympic medals, and they're actually with your dad. But when it comes to your Ironman medal, you would wear that and show it off. Why is that? It's just because of the different,
I mean, it's the real goal here is just to finish this thing.
Right.
I had never done a full Ironman before. I had never swam 2.4 miles in open water ocean when the current and the tide was like crazy.
With a zillion other people. Yeah, exactly.
And it's very, you know, so you get out of the water, you're dehydrated because it's 100 degrees, it's 100% humidity, you jump on a bike, and now you go up the Queen K towards Hawi, which is the turnaround point. It's 112 miles, 60-mile-an-hour crosswind.
Oh, man.
There's no MP3 players allowed, so there's no music, right? There's no drafting allowed, and you just are basically hammering the pedals for 5+ hours. Get off the bike, throw your running shoes on, and then you run a marathon. And so you start the marathon in a complete, depleted, dehydrated, deficient state, where the first 3 miles, in my head, every quarter mile, I was like, I don't know how to finish this race.
Oh my God.
And the reason why I'm telling this story is because this is why it's so special, I think, to people who do this. It doesn't matter how hard you train, when you show up on the day, and I can't speak for the professional athletes because they're just in a different category, but when you show up on that day, it doesn't matter how hard you've been training, there's something about that race that cracks the best of people in the world, the most fit people in the world. Doesn't matter how well prepared they are. And they say, like, you know, you can never defeat the island. The island will defeat you. You either accept what it gives you, or you go with the flow. You know, very Hawaii-esque. And so I very much embraced that culture when I was there, at least internally in my head. And I literally was having hallucinations in the last 10 miles of my marathon. But it was in a way where, you know, like I was having very internal conversations with myself. It forced me to go above and beyond what I thought my body was physically designed to do on that day. I had GI tract shut down, which means that I was no longer digesting the salt tablets and the liquid and the food that I was ingesting, which means that it wasn't getting to into my system so that it was fueling my body. So I basically was cramping because I was having the shutdown. And so, you know, you have about 6 miles remaining in this Ironman. And, you know, these internal conversations that you have with yourself, and they can range from, you're not going to do this, just stop. No one's looking. There's no cameras around. NBC's miles up the road. You're dying. Your head is literally cooking.
Yeah.
There's 134-degree ambient temperature on the road, on the black lava rock on the left-hand side of the road, black lava rock on the right-hand side of the road. There's no trees, no shade. You're running on black asphalt. What's the difference? You just walk the rest. And then, you know, internally, you have to come to a decision and face kind of your own fears of, okay, how far can I push this? And, you know.
And you have to push it.
And you pushed it.
Right, and you did.
And it was amazing.
Well, so you said to me earlier, before we started this interview, that Ironman taught you to be a better entrepreneur. I mean, there's some sort of connection there.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, when I did the Ironman, so this is 4 years into my retirement, where I had never really been skating or been on the ice or competing for anything, in my mind, of real value in the sporting world. I needed this race more than anything. I needed it to reset myself, to recognize who I was at the core, which is an athlete, and remind myself that I do have the mental fortitude, strength, and willpower to overcome any challenge that comes my way, any obstacle, any difficulty, no matter how many times I get knocked down, no matter how many mistakes that I do make, I know that it will be okay, and I will wake up and I will finish whatever I'm going to do. And when you have this mentality, when you finish the Ironman, it gives you that strength that is so deep inside, that it's hard to describe, but the mind and the brain is so powerful. And that's that confidence that you take with you and those memories. This race is not about other people in Kona, Hawaii. Right. This race is for yourself. Even the professional athletes will tell you that. There's other competitors, but in reality, this is a race for you as a person, for you as an individual. And how you take that race, how you accomplish or how you treat that is really up to you. And so in the fashion that I like to do it, I had just one speed. And so I went balls to the wall as hard as I could. I took my watch off. I didn't really check to see my timing. I didn't have a heart rate monitor. I didn't care. I just wanted to go as hard as I humanly possibly could go, almost wanting to crack on the course, right? That sounds kind of in a sick way.
Yeah.
But just wanting to see how far I could push it.
Right.
And if I could keep going. And I succeeded, and I finished, and it was so, the last 2 miles, and the last probably half a mile is when you realize, oh my gosh, now I understand why people come back every single year and do this crazy, ridiculously hard and grueling race.
Crazy, yes,
right?
yes.
That's why.
But yeah, you got that sensation immediately. Yeah. Well, you know, this is not all you're doing. You're obviously doing a lot of other things, including, let's please talk about your foundation and the work that you do through that foundation.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit more about what you guys do.
Sure. So I knew that I really wanted to partner with an organization and make a big difference. And so I had set up my own charity, Apolo Ohno charity, but I found it to be much more effective rather than being another celebrity who has a charity. And then some have excellent ones, so I'm not knocking anybody, but I'm just saying there's a lot that just, they start and they kind of crumble. Yeah. It's a full-time job running a charitable organization. Absolutely. And so I thought, well, my efforts are better well spent if I place all of my time and energy into an existing organization, and I try to drive as much traffic and awareness to that as possible. And so I've worked with many, Children's Hospital, Ronald McDonald House, Nikkei Concerns in Seattle, Stand Up to Cancer. Kind of the closest to me would have to be, you know, because of my Olympic space, would have to be the Special Olympics, and really help raise awareness and give every single one of those athletes a chance to compete openly. This group of people, they're just really, really, they're awesome. You know, and you get around that and you see the impact that you can have on another athlete's life. And then you realize the trick here that you don't know is when you go and spend time with these athletes, you think you're giving your time to them, but you learn so much in return. And it's hard, I tell them that all the time, like, look, just go do it. Just volunteer, spend a couple hours, and call me after and let me know how it is. Every single person who's done that, and one of my friends who's been a part of it, are just going to spectate. They've been like, I got so much more out of this than I think I brought.
Curious, though, you said you miss training, you miss skating every day.
Yeah.
So are you still trying to take part somehow? I mean, with the Winter Olympics coming up in Pyeongchang, South Korea, are you taking part somehow that way?
So upon retirement, and I kind of jumped around a little bit, but upon retirement, I told myself that I didn't want to basically ever get depressed because I wasn't competing.
Yeah.
And so I just hit the ground as hard as I could, entrepreneurial spirit, full effect, traveling the world, trying to do as much as I can to market both myself, my brand, other businesses, do as much as I possibly could in that time frame to become and achieve success outside of the sporting world.
Okay.
And I dabbled from everything, right? So I did 2012 London Olympics. I was there with NBC. I did the 2014 Olympic Games in Sochi. I will be going to the Pyeongchang Games in 2018. I'll be going to Tokyo in 2020. I'll be going to Beijing in 2022.
Oh my gosh, you're just set up for a while.
Yeah. Look, I love the Olympic Games. That's what it comes down to. And I love being I love being on the other side of the camera, right, competing and doing it. But now I can hopefully explain and give intricate details and insight, hopefully, that has never been taught before or said before from an athlete's point of view. And plus, I know the sport like the back of my hand.
Listen, Apolo, I'm so happy to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time. It was great having you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, and good luck with everything.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll be right back with more from Los Angeles. Welcome back. Award-winning and best-selling author Andrew Solomon is one of today's most prolific and respected writers on politics, culture, and psychology. Over his career, he has captivated audiences with empowering stories that promote the idea of self-acceptance by using the power of the mind. In addition, Solomon is an activist for mental health, education, the arts, and LGBT rights. His book, The Noonday Demon, an Atlas for Depression, won the National Book Award and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Solomon also was highly praised for his deep and elegant writing in Far from the Tree, Parents, Children, and the Search for Identity, which explores themes of generosity, acceptance, and tolerance among parents who are raising exceptional children. Most recently, Solomon released Far and Away, reporting from the brink of change, a collection of travel writings from places far off the beaten path. Joining us now from Fort Worth, Texas, is Andrew Solomon. Andrew, very good to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about your childhood, because I know that you have said in several talks and even in your books and writings that your childhood did influence a great deal in the way you approach your life now. You grappled with dyslexia when you were very young, and your mother was really determined to help you learn how to read properly, and you did. You, though, say that it was both a good thing and a bad thing that she did this with you. Why is that?
Well, it was a good thing insofar as I really haven't been very disabled by my dyslexia. I still have trouble with handwriting and I type everything, but essentially through incredibly intensive drilling, which she made into a lot of fun, we did really well. But I think the evidence that we could overcome that neurological abnormality then informed the attempts of my family to get me not to be gay when I was older. And the notion that the dyslexia and the gayness were somehow the same struck me as a problematical notion. Because while I'm very glad the dyslexia was largely resolved, I'm very troubled and was very troubled by any attempts to shift me away from my sexual orientation and identity.
And you've openly spoken about that conflict within the family, and you yourself thinking that you could be, quote unquote, cured by surrogates and different types of therapies, but clearly you came to the realization that that was just not the right approach.
I was really interested in the way that I ultimately shifted from seeing my condition as a tragedy to seeing it as an identity and something I could be proud of. And that was a real transition for me. But I certainly started off thinking, oh my God, this is a disaster. What on earth can I do to fix it?
You had suffered from depression as an adult, and you have been so descriptive in the suffering of that depression. I mean, when I read your work, it was painful to me. And so I almost felt your pain. Can you take me back to that time and really describe to me what that was like to try to deal with this depression and, you know, how you eventually were able to come out of that darkness?
I had had what I guess were initial precursor episodes, sort of little depressions that came ahead. My really big depression began in 1994. And I remember at first just feeling kind of tired all the time, and then beginning to lose interest in things that I would have thought were a lot of fun, and then beginning to feel overwhelmed by the ordinary business of daily life. I would think, oh, I should take a shower, but I would think I'd have to go into the bathroom and turn the water on and get under it and lather my hair, and it all sounded to me as overwhelming as the Stations of the Cross. And I realized, even as I was going through all of that, that it was ridiculous, but it was nonetheless there. And then the acute anxiety set in, this constant sense of being afraid of something, but not knowing what I was afraid of. And then on top of the anxiety began the feeling that just being alive was so painful, minute to minute. And I got more and more disabled, and I more and more wanted to figure it out and fight it on my own, and didn't really even know what to call it. And finally, one day I woke up feeling so frightened and so overwhelmed, and so much as though my life had lost all its vitality, that I couldn't move. And I almost thought I'd had a stroke. And I lay in bed staring at the telephone, thinking I need help, for hours and hours. And finally the phone rang, and it was my father. And I said I was in trouble. And that was the day my treatment for depression began.
Well, in your book, The Noonday Demon, you obviously talk about this topic, and again, extensive research. You talk to many families, many individuals dealing with different kinds of ailments. Was this something that you wanted to do because of your own experiences? And what did you glean from all the people that you spoke to and the situations that you were made aware of?
Well, I make sense of my own experience in part by writing it down. But when I was depressed, I looked for a book that could help me. And I found there were books of history of mental illness, there were dense psychiatric texts, there were philosophical commentaries, but there was a kind of chaos in the kingdom, and there was nothing that brought it all together. And I thought there was a real need for that. And I thought, if I'm going to say that I think there should be less stigma around depression, I have to be ready to talk about my own experience and talk about it as directly as I possibly can. And after the New Yorker article came out, I received several thousand letters in the month after it came out. And I thought, okay, there's a real need for this. And in talking to other people and getting other narratives, I became really interested in the tension between illness and personality, and really ultimately wanted to write a book that was sort of a book about how you can make meaning of your life, even if it includes this unwelcome intrusion of depression.
So, Andrew, what was the most profound thing that you learned by writing this book?
The most profound thing, I think, is that in the first place, depression is not a modern Western middle-class phenomenon. It exists across the whole spectrum and always has. But more profoundly, I found that people who have been depressed and then they get a little bit better and then they never want to think about it again end up being the most haunted, because there's a good chance they'll relapse, and when they do, they will once more lose the sense of being themselves and of being whole. And that people who look at the depression and say, this was hell, I would never have chosen it, it's not what I wanted, but I learned and grew from it, and who incorporate it into their understanding of themselves, are ironically the ones who are best prepared for its resurgence and who have the greatest sense of peace and relationship to it.
Right. Well, speaking of which, your other book, Far From the Tree, talks about that as well, is these parents and these families who are dealing with children with different disabilities and issues that are not the norm, of course. And so this was a monumental book, again, in looking at several families, several situations, and it's surprising what you learn from this book and writing this book, isn't it?
Very surprising. I had been assigned an article about deaf culture by the New York Times Magazine, and I discovered that there was a real culture around deafness, around people who couldn't hear, who communicated in sign language. And I found out that most of them were born to hearing parents, and that they discovered that sense of deaf identity as they were growing up. And I thought how similar it was to the experience of gay people who are meek parents and who acquire a sense of identity later on. And then as I began to investigate, I realized there were more and more and more areas in which people had these identities that they didn't share with their parents. And I sort of formulated a theory of identity out of it and really wanted to look at why is it that some families, given a child who's radically different in some way, fall apart, and other families, given a child like that, establish an even greater closeness and intimacy than they might have had otherwise.
Andrew, wondering what you're working on next. A short story, maybe? A tiny little book?
I'm actually working on a book of stories based on the stories that I've told my children as they're growing up. My children are 7 and 8, and I want to write those before they outgrow them. And I'm also working on a book about the redefinition of family, looking at how working mothers, stay-at-home fathers, gay families, open adoptions, mixed-race families, and so on, have changed our understanding of what it means to be a family, and how that's been both enormously enriching and in some cases quite difficult to rearrange ourselves to accommodate.
Well, Andrew, I look forward to it, as I'm sure many, many other fans of your writing. So, Andrew Solomon, thank you so much for your time. Really, it was lovely talking to you today.
Thank you so much. A real pleasure for me.
Well, coming up next, how a former U.S. Olympian turned her secret life as an adult escort into healing. It's a fascinating story, so stay right there. Well, this next story is one that sounds like it came out of Hollywood. Suzy Favor Hamilton was the darling of the running world and competed in 3 Olympic Games. She had endorsements, fame, and fortune. But a little more than a decade after she competed in the 2000 Olympics, Hamilton began leading a double life as a top adult escort in Las Vegas. In a recently released autobiography, Fast Girl, Suzy Favor Hamilton chronicles her journey in hopes of raising awareness of bipolar disorder. Joining us to share her incredible story is Suzy Favor Hamilton. Suzy, welcome to Full Frame.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, to say that this is an incredible story is kind of an understatement. It is an unbelievable story that you have chronicled in this book. Let's start from college, because that's when you were such a rising super running world, right?
Absolutely.
I got to get these numbers right. 9 NCAA titles, 32 conference championships. That was a record back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I never lost.
Never lost.
Yeah.
You just always had this winning streak, right?
Yeah, I always had this drive. Obviously, I had a natural ability, but I had this drive, this intense drive, obsession to run.
Right,
yeah.
Which would come into play later, obviously, and we're going to obviously go there. But what was it about running and competing for you? I mean, was it, you were getting satisfaction out of that, obviously.
Absolutely. Running, to me, something changed in my mind. I didn't know it was an endorphin high at the time, but I was always just so up, and I had enormous energy. I could never stop. I could never sit still. Even after a 10-mile run, I was still at home cleaning the house, making dinner nonstop till 10 o'clock at night.
Wow. Wow. So you took that energy, obviously, and made it into a running career. So after college, you then won national championships.
Yes.
And then you went to 3 Olympic Games.
Right. I think it's important to know, like early on in my running career, I didn't live a normal life that most teenagers live. My life was strictly training.
Right.
I didn't have any balance. I didn't do what teenagers do and explore different avenues. I was the perfect all-American girl who could do no wrong.
But people saw you that way, so the pressure must have been enormous at such a young age to try and live up to that standard.
It was, the pressure was incredible, and I tried to be perfect.
Yeah.
I tried to please everybody, my parents, my community, my coaches, just enormous pressure. In 2000, for the Olympics, that was my 3rd Olympics, my brother had died by suicide the year before. He was
had
bipolar.
been diagnosed with bipolar disease, right? Yeah.
And I wanted to win for my family so bad. So it was like I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Yeah, it was unbelievable. With 200 meters to saw white, and my legs felt like cement blocks.
Oh
and my heart was just racing, and with 75 meters to go, I knew I wasn't going to win. So it happened so quickly. I just told myself, just fall. And when I said that, I literally fell. I mean, I must be a good actress when I'm running, because it looked so
real. I saw the footage.
Yeah.
It really looked like you had hurt yourself. And so you sort of kind of played that part, didn't you? Because you didn't know what else to do at that point.
As an athlete, sometimes many athletes look for a reason out instead of saying that they failed or they disappointed. So for me, instead of what my mind thought I would be a failure if I came in last, falling was the excuse. Now I had an excuse. It wasn't really me. It was something else.
So at that moment after that happened, was that a pivotal moment for you? Did things shift? What happened?
That was the downfall. That was the beginning of what was about to change in my life. But that was the moment that I knew I didn't have another Olympics in me. And I didn't achieve what I had set out to as a 12-year-old.
So then after the Olympics, you tried to live a normal life, right? You were married already. You had a daughter. And so you had a seemingly decent life with your family in Wisconsin.
Right. Everybody said, oh my gosh, she has everything.
Right.
But shortly after the birth of my child, which can happen in some women, something changed in me. Obviously, bipolar was starting to surface. We didn't know that.
You didn't know that, right.
I was depressed. I went to see a doctor, and within 10 minutes, the doctor said that I was depressed and prescribed me an antidepressant. It was Zoloft, which is a great drug, but somebody with bipolar, there are chances of bad things happening.
And that's what I found fascinating about your story, is that because you were misdiagnosed with depression and given this drug, it actually made your bipolar disorder far worse than it should have been.
It made it raging, just raging. Something changed in me pretty quickly, where I was feeling on top of the world. I felt my inhibitions sliding away.
Wow.
So no inhibitions. I would do anything. This risky behavior that comes along with bipolar was also surfacing.
Right.
So I was doing anything to get that high. On our 20th wedding anniversary, this was 2 months before I started taking, 2 months before the 20th anniversary, I was on the Zoloft.
Okay.
So I was already changing.
Right.
We jumped out of an airplane, and then that evening, we did something that, obviously I know a lot of people do this, but it's never made public, is we had a threesome in Vegas.
In Vegas, yep.
And after that experience with another
And we should
woman,
mention that your husband was reluctant to do all of these things, but he thought, you know, maybe this is going to help you with your depression, and so he was trying to play along, right?
Absolutely. And he sees that I'm doing so great, and I'm so happy.
Yeah.
So he was used to me being depressed, and you know, when you're depressed, it's hard to be around that person.
Sure.
So I'm changing, and he's liking the change. So the threesome changed me dramatically. After it happened, something went off in my head, like, wow, this is an even bigger high than I've ever experienced. I also didn't know with bipolar, one of the signs of bipolar is hypersexuality. A lot of people don't understand that at
I didn't
all.
know that about bipolar.
Google, you know, if you Google bipolar and hypersexuality, this is one of the symptoms. Unfortunately, people, psychiatrists, psychologists, not all of them, but there are a few that don't address this issue when diagnosing somebody.
So you were textbook when it came to that hypersexuality with bipolar disease. So therefore, that's what then led you into this life of being an escort. I mean, that to me was fascinating. I was like, wow, how does she then decide to do that and really dedicate so much of yourself to being this escort in Las Vegas?
Well, it was a 6-month period from the threesome to becoming a full-fledged escort. And when I was an escort, it was only going to be once. It was a part of this fantasy to get that high, even higher. So when this happened, and I did the first escorting appearance, I realized, wow, I need to do this again and again. I, for once in my life, had this incredible power over these men, which a lot of people are like, wait a minute, you're in a dangerous situation. Everything was screened. I felt this power. So this change in me was so bizarre, but it came so easily.
And it's so extreme, but again, that is bipolar disorder, right? It is that extreme behavior.
It's talking a mile a minute, endless energy, the hypersexuality, risky behavior. I was demonstrating all of this. But the interesting part is I never did this to hurt anybody. That was never my intention. And it was to feed the brain, to feed the mania. And many people also don't understand that. If something doesn't look right in a behavior of a loved one, as myself, there's a problem, there's something wrong.
But with your husband then, I mean, because he stuck by you throughout this whole thing, and you know, you guys are still together and your family is doing well now, but it's fascinating to me that he stuck by you, he stayed with you, knowing what you were doing. Why do you think he did that?
Well, he couldn't get me out. That wasn't going to happen, first of all. There was no way I was getting out.
Yeah, because you were like, no, I love it. I'm doing this for as long as I can.
I had no voice of reason. I had no ceiling to any inhibitions that I had. So my husband couldn't get me out. And what is he supposed to do? Call his parents? You know, I would resent him for the rest of my life if he did something like that. But once he found out I was diagnosed with bipolar, which was early on after I was outed as an escort, he, quite frankly, he said, I'm going to focus on the disease. I'm not going to focus on your behavior. And I'm going to love you. I'm going to support you. We didn't know if our marriage was going to work out or not during this rough period after I was outed, but he was there for me.
That's a unique individual. I mean, I have to admit, even when I was reading your story, I was like, wow, I'm not sure if I could have done that for somebody. Right? Because it was such an unbelievable circumstance, right? Let's talk about when you were outed. Because you were going along thinking that you were just going to live this double life. Right? No problem.
I was telling people my name. I was telling them I was this Olympian.
You were taking some risks, right? At first you had an identity. It was Kelly. Right? But then you started telling some of your clients who you actually were because you were, again, pushing the envelope. You eventually got outed by an investigative reporter.
It was a client that he felt rejected by me. Many times the clients can get obsessive with the girls, and so he became obsessed with me.
He wanted to marry you.
He wanted to marry me. So because I had not been able to see it and contacted the tabloid found me in Vegas, and basically he said, I'm going to ruin your life.
Describe to me that moment when he came up to you and said, Suzy, I know what you're doing and who you are.
When he first approached me, I was kind of numb to it. It didn't really hit me the impact it was going to have on my husband, my daughter, my family, my loved ones. It was, you know, later the next day that it really hit, and I knew, okay, this is not good. My life is over. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to change my hair color. I'm going to have to just disappear. And for me, you know, I figured, okay, I can just deny this. I can say, no, that wasn't me. But they had too much on me.
They had a lot.
He did his research.
So after you're outed, you finally did get correctly diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Within 2 weeks after I was outed.
So that's fascinating to me that even with the history of your brother having bipolar disorder and, you know, your issues with, you thought, depression, that never would have come up at any point until then.
You know, the doctor, I wish the doctor would have asked, what is your mental health background in your family? That would have been a huge clue to not put me on this antidepressant. But that was never brought up. I didn't know to bring that up. But now I can tell people, bring that up to your doctor if they don't ask that question.
Start asking.
It's huge.
Yeah, exactly. But that seems strange to me that they wouldn't have brought that up. But then you decided, okay, I'm going to make something out of this darkness that I was in and shed some light on the problem of mental illness and the issues surrounding it.
Right, because, I had emails coming in left and right when the story came out about how awful I was.
It was big news.
Yeah, telling me I was a slut, I was a whore, I should just die by suicide like my brother.
And even your husband got emails from people.
Oh, yeah,
right? Like
telling
horrible
him,
emails.
You need to leave her, she's an awful person.
Right.
My husband obviously knew that I was a good person. He had been married to me for 20 years.
Yeah.
It was this bad year. Is he supposed to just get up and walk away, which he wasn't going to do?
Right.
But I decided early on, with the help of my husband, I never could have done this, to forgive myself. I kept saying, you're stuck and you are never going to get better until you forgive yourself. And so many people can't forgive themselves.
Right.
But they need to in order to move on, to have a healthy, happy life.
Yeah.
And that's what I've decided is the negative people, educate them. I get my word out, my message, and they can have their opinion and do what they want with it.
All right. Well, Suzy, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
It was great talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. We'll be right back with this week's Full Frame Close-Up. The Chinese are believed to be the first to cultivate naturally dwarfed trees called pinjing. These potted landscapes are now commonly referred to as bonsai, thanks to the association with Japanese culture. It's an art form that caught the eye of Brooklyn, New York native Paul Graviano back in 1964. His chance encounter with the bonsai tree sparked infatuation. His hobby soon turned into a business, and he created Bonsai of Brooklyn. But Graviano got more out of his venture than just money. Creating his miniature masterpieces brought him wisdom and patience to endure under difficult circumstances. It wasn't until he defeated lung cancer, however, that he truly learned it was the little things in life that matter the most.
If you want something badly, and there's only one way to do it, you either do it the one way that there is, or don't do it at all. This is something that I wanted badly enough to have the patience. The care required is a lot less than most people think. You have to provide the right environment for the tree to survive. You are talking to one of the most impatient, stubborn, pig-headed people you've ever met. I want everything the day before yesterday, not yesterday, the day before. When I started this hobby, one of the first things I learned is that the tree don't give a rat's patootie what I want. They're going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to do it at their own pace. There are plant stimulants that you could use, but the bottom line is we're still talking about years and decades and centuries, not days and weeks and months. And there's nothing that anybody could do to speed that up. I went to a plant store in the neighborhood, and on the counter, the owner had a juniper bonsai. When I saw this bonsai, it was something I had to have. It was $25, which at that time was a lot of money. and I only had $15 on me. I went back, got some more money, went and bought the juniper. There were 3 nurseries in my immediate area. And the second one, too, was owned by a fellow named Al. And Al had a few bonsai trees for sale and also some pots. So I bought a couple of pots from him, and I bought some material. And that was it. I was addicted at that point. And every time I had some spare time, I ran to the nursery and I bought some more stock and I made some more trees. At the time, I was an insurance agent. I did very well. I was making a really good income, and I hated it. What I did is in the morning, instead of putting on my suit and tie, I put on a pair of dungarees, a t-shirt, went into my office, and gave my 2 weeks' notice. I opened the business, and that was 40 years ago this past January. And this has been my source of income for the last 40 years. And instead of doing something that makes me miserable, I do something that makes me smile all the time. And that's pretty good. To me, creating gives me pleasure. With my trains, I enjoy creating things that will work and be different than what most people are used to seeing. And with the trees, it's the same thing. It's taking a tree that's basically untrained and influencing the way it grows and the shape it has. In the fall of 1986, I quit smoking to help my wife quit smoking. Had I not done that, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because in the spring of 2004, I went to see my doctor for a cough that I had. And he took an x-ray and almost passed out when he saw it. There was a large mass in my right lung. So finally, after all these tests concluded, they referred me to a surgeon. I told him, if I'm going to be eligible to see a surgeon, I want a cowboy. And he looked at me and he says, a cowboy? I says, yeah. I says, I want somebody who's going to try and give me a normal life, who's going to try and save me. And if it's a matter of prolonging my life for a year or two, I'm not interested. If it's a situation where it's either give me a full life or kill me on the operating table, I'll take my chances. And I don't even care what the odds are. That's what I want. So he sent me to a doctor who was, I believe, 41 or 42 at the time. And that's pretty cowboy. When I got diagnosed, I sold off most of my trees because I knew my wife wouldn't be able to take care of them, and they were all valuable. And A, I figured she could use the money more than she could use dead trees. And B, I wanted the trees to have a chance. So they rolled me into the operating room. When I opened my eyes, I was coming out of the anesthetic. I looked at the doctor, and when he caught my eyes, this big grin came on his face. And I says, what happened? And he says, the lymph nodes were inflamed, not malignant. All the samples were negative. We took out 2/3 of your right lung. The tumor was the size of a softball, not a baseball, a softball, like that, kind of like a cantaloupe, sort of. He says, as of right now, you're cancer-free. You know, I'm just so lucky, so blessed in so many different ways. I have the best wife that anyone has ever had. I've got a wife that no man deserves, but I got her. I earn my living doing something that I love. I have a hobby that I love, and I got my health, which of course is the most important thing of all. I believe that I've become more patient in a lot of ways. I think that's partly from being involved in bonsai cultivation, and probably partly in just getting older. You know, you kind of mellow and learn to take things at a slower pace.
And that's it for this week. Join the conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And you can also watch Full Frame on our mobile app, available worldwide on any smartphone for free. Get the latest news headlines and connect to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Weibo. Search CCTV America on your app store to download today. All of our interviews can still also be found online at cctv-america.com. And of course, let us know what you'd like us to take Full Frame next. Simply email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm May Lee in Los Angeles. We'll see you next time.